NBS Frontline.
Ibrahim Traore cuts a striking figure, calm, confident, and collected. His demeanor is reminiscent of Thomas Sankara, the Burkinabe revolutionary hero. Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Niger have experienced successful coups, while attempts in the Gambia elections that are susceptible to rigging by the very presidents who sanctioned them. East African countries have not experienced as many coups as their West African counterparts. Uganda's last coup was in 1970s, where election violence is commonplace in many African countries. The presidents who have won such elections, sometimes with an overwhelming majority of the vote, are often deposed through coups or mass uprising. What does this say about the legitimacy of the polls that are held like clockwork in most African states? Why does the idea of peaceful transfer of power seem repugnant to African leaders? Are the young people on the continent being heard? Are they a new force to watch? This is The Frontline.
NBS Frontline.
A very good evening and welcome to this edition of The Frontline on NBS TV. My name is Charles Mwangusha-Mpagi. Tonight, a lot of things have been happening in the country. The National Unity Platform has announced a program to popularize and open offices across the country. Will the police be reacting? Maybe, maybe not. We'll be watching that space. They're countering what they see elsewhere. The Forum for Democratic Change continues in its efforts. I don't know if it's harmonizing or not it harmonizing, trying to hold elections, and another faction within the party not supportive of the elections. We'll be watching that as well. And many people are still watching what General Muhoozi Kainerugaba is doing as he moves across the country. He was in Teso sub-region to hold barazas. Some people see that as campaigning. We did have a discussion about that last week. But the broader issue is military involvement in politics. Lessons from West Africa. I was looking at the numbers. They're staggering. Incredible numbers of coups and attempted coups, particularly in Francophone countries on the African continent. And the classification, which countries are likely to be prone to coups? They're generally poor, the military is dominant, politics is weak, organized around the personalities, and that former leader, I think we can call him former leader of Niger, Bazoum. There was, within a space of one day, an attempted coup that failed in the morning and a coup that succeeded in the afternoon. And that's not yet resolved. West African countries under ECOWAS are threatening to go into Niger and restore order there, but they're being warned by other countries that led in this coup business. But before I forget, Parliament on Tuesday passed that controversial Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Bill 2023, effectively putting about 5 districts in Uganda that grow Mairungi out of business. A lot of intense debate happening across those districts that produce Mairungi, and that debate is on. But we'll discuss that on another occasion, whether Mairungi is actually a narcotic drug or not. But we'll discuss that on another occasion. Let's come back to military involvement in politics on the African continent. If you could cross a little bit, look into Russia, the killing yesterday of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Pardon?
The killing was the death.
He died in a plane crash. There's suspicion that the plane could have been shot by a missile. President Vladimir Putin has confirmed that Yevgeny Prigozhin died in that plane crash, was one of the passengers on that private jet, and that he's dead, and he sent condolences. Many people will know that Yevgeny Prigozhin, under his Wagner mercenary group, has been deeply involved in Africa, especially in West Africa, and they were making quite interesting comments recently about the Niger coup and where they...
He's been involved in 21 African countries.
Yes, he's been involved in...
Including countries in this region.
Yeah,
that I will not mention.
21 African countries, according to Edgar Tavaro there, but we'll come to that. And deeply involved in the Ukraine conflict. That's part of the military involvement. Let me introduce the panel that I have tonight, starting from the extreme end. Returning after a bit of absence, Minister for ICT and National Guidance, Member of Parliament for Chinchizi East Constituency in Kanungu District, SEC member and Western Vice Chairperson, Western Uganda, of the National Resistance Movement, the Honorable Dr. Christopher Bariomunsi. Very nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Charles, and good evening, fellow panelists, and good evening, viewers. I am happy to be back.
Edgar Tavaro is a regionalist, discusses a lot of regional issues, but actually comes from a village called Kijura, somewhere in Kabarore district. They grow a lot of tea.
Well,
And his sub-counter grows a lot of mairungi, and they've been protesting.
They've actually been uprooting tea for Mairungi.
Yes, and now they're being told
We'll
that
catch up with you.
they need to uproot the mairungi.
We shall retaliate. But I think the Honorable Dr. Bagio Musi is
Yes.
also official government spokesperson.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
Yeah, you always have to add that. But I don't know whether he's here in that capacity or...
All those
He's
capacities.
Edgar. Dr. Bariomunsi is my guest.
Much obliged.
So whichever capacity he's in.
I want to engage him, knowing what
No.
what interests is
You
represented.
combine all those capacities, I have come with them.
Because
Yes.
as an intellectual, sometimes you're very, very, very good to engage.
Yes.
But as a government spokesperson, I'll reserve my comments.
It's very difficult. Edgar Tavaro is a lawyer.
I'll bring you a yellow shirt so that you conform and be
From
online.
the mountains of the moon, from the Alliance for National Transformation and the frontliner, the Honorable Winnie Kiza. They've been busy organizing the second edition of the Rwenzori Marathon, which will be happening next,
Yeah,
The
on
other-
the 2nd of September.
2nd of September, climbing the mountains of the moon
Yeah.
on the run. Very nice to have you. And from Kira municipality, his position as party whip in parliament is still under controversy, but we have frontliner, the Honorable Hon.Ssemujju Nganda. Very nice to have you, sir.
There is no controversy. Thank you.
You have two whips for the FDC.
His
No, there
position
is
is
one.
written in a pencil.
You see, when the cabinet list was released,
Which cabinet?
the president wrote that late Chivejinja had advised him to establish a minister for national guidance. When he appointed him Minister for Information, he said, okay, you can have your thing since you are the one who proposed it. I don't know why Chris will still want to carry on with it. This was Chirunda Chivejinja's thing.
Yeah, that shows the NRM listens to Ugandans and takes their views. So my ministry is ICT and national guidance. And today the ministry, the top management passed the national guidance policy, which we shall be sending to cabinet for approval and then to parliament. So that we give you how.
What should
would
we expect
like.
in that policy?
No.
That national guidance policy?
Basically, the national guidance is to rally Ugandans to
Support
be
NRM.
patriotic and have that national consciousness. That the Honorable Ssemujju, much as he's in the opposition and I'm in NRM, but both of us must appreciate we are Ugandans and we should together support what is in the interest of Uganda as a country. If I can summarize.
Through coercion?
No. Why? Not coercion.
Through consensus building.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me start with you, actually, Edgar Tavaro. In summary, to put, I was looking at the numbers and they're staggering.
Of
Between
attempted coups and those that never
attempted coups
succeeded.
and those that succeeded. Then you have between the time Africa gets independence, across the
From
world,
1957.
from across the world, from around 1946 through to around 2008, you have more than 220 attempted coups.
No, actually, 486 attempted
486 attempted
Yes.
coups.
220 succeeded.
successful coups. Yes,
Yes.
successful coups. And then you have a kind of a lull that runs for a period of time up to around 2018-ish?
The 1990s were basically
Yes.
years of hope in Africa.
Yes, and
Yeah.
you have a lot
Renewed
of
hope, renewed hope.
And we're having discussions a few years ago, and you're thinking that coups are not coming back, especially in the African continent. And then they research, and it's been phenomenal over the last. I was just talking about Niger on the same day, twice. I think Sudan has holds the flag on the African continent for the most attempts at coups, and also successful ones. I think they did about 17.
Yes.
Yes, on the continent.
And sometimes coups by themselves, a leader leads a coup and throws out one group, establishes a new constitutional order.
Yes.
A coup even within the same, with the same government.
Let's approach it from the broader question of military involvement, because you haven't had the military getting so actively involved as we're having it lately after either armed rebellions, guerrilla struggles, or coups were moving very fast towards establishing or re-establishing democracy.
You know, I'd like to draw lessons from the so-called years of hope when we had pro-democracy demonstrations throughout most of Africa. That was after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the immediate collapse, the period following the collapse of the Soviet Union. You shall recall there were many pro-democracy demonstrations, and some countries transited. Zambia, Malawi, Benin, which other countries? There were attempts to deepen democratization. Even Kenya itself. You remember Ford Kenya, under the Mwai Kibaki's, late Ken Matiba, Jaramogi Odinga. Even in Rwanda itself, there were pro-democracy demonstrations that led to a fragile government that eventually fell in 1994. Now, the 90s were basically years of hope. And you do recall in the mid or late 90s, the Secretary of State for the United States, Madeleine Albright, coined the term that we had now a new breed of African leaders. But mind you, all the persons she was referring to as the new breed of African leaders had accessed power by the barrel of the gun. And it was not long after she said that they turned the guns on themselves. All of them fought.
So you're talking about the new breed of African leaders starts from the Horn of Africa, Eritrea.
Yes, Eritrea,
Isaias Afwerki.
Ethiopia, yes.
Then you come to Ethiopia,
Yes.
Meles Zenawi.
Zenawi.
You come to Kampala,
Yes.
Yoweri Museveni.
Yoweri Museveni.
You go to
Rwanda,
Paul Kagame.
Paul Kagame.
And then
DRC, Zaire DRC.
yes,
Laura
DRC,
Desire Kabila.
yes,
Yeah.
Laura Desire Kabila.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, mind you, this is now America trying to drive an agenda that there's a new dawn in Africa. But unfortunately, the persons they were pushing had come to power through the barrel of the gun. So it was an antidote against the forces of what? Of democratization. And Ssemujju, maybe to make Ssemujju a little happy, the democratization credentials of all these leaders were questioned. Now, fast forward to what is happening right now. I'd like to draw...
Before you go away from that, Isaias Afwerki, new breed is still in charge.
Yes.
In
He has never undergone an election.
Yes, he decided not to pretend about elections.
Yes.
Some people say.
Yes.
Meles Zenawi.
Yes.
Was removed.
He
in
died.
power.
He died.
He died in power.
He died,
in
but
office.
he ran a paternalistic system.
Yes.
Out of maybe 500 or so MPs, they had less than 10 opposition MPs.
Yes.
And, he ruled through brute force. And you remember demonstrations and mauling you remember the which is this group?
The group he handed over to, of Dissalem?
The one after, the one, Abi Muhammad, he's a community.
Yes,
You
the
remember?
Oromos.
Yeah, the Oromos. You remember how many of them they would kill during those demonstrations? So it was an antidote. And surprisingly, America, which was supposed to be pushing for democratization, was now supporting persons who had come to power through the barrel of the gun. Now, as it were, it seemed to have come as an acceptable way of establishing hegemony or ruling government and taking over state power. Now, in the present epoch that we're having in this part of Africa that you're calling West Africa, every country that is above what we call the 14th parallel. Parallel is are they called latitudes? Those imaginary lines on the world map. Now, every area, every territory above that 14th parallel is under civil strife. Central African Republic, Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Chad, Niger, Western Sahrawi, Burkina Faso, much of Libya, and also other territories in the Maghreb. Now, these territories have very similar population patterns. One, there's always conflict between the sedentary and the nomadic communities. Two, they have very similar weather, climatic conditions. They are dry, there's increased desertification. And therefore, there's strain on the traditional ways of life. The traditional ways of life, because we've had more than 4 years of absence of rainfall in that part of Africa.
But if you look at the history of coups, then the recent climatic conditions may not speak to every situation.
I'm coming to it. There's a pattern.
Yes.
There's a pattern. And remember the external forces involved in these coups. In the 1880s, we had the Berlin Conference. Now what is happening? We're having a conference in Beijing that comes together to agree on how they share the spoils of natural resources in Africa. Now, because of wide levels of poverty, stress, water scarcity and stress on the crops, there's been failure, particularly on staple foods like wheat and grain. Now, once you lose your sovereignty for food, once food security is threatened, then the most organized forces, the most organized political formations, most organized political forces are the ones that take charge. Now, in that part of Africa, unfortunately for us, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's the soldiers who are the most organized group. And I have to add, the travesty that we are suffering is that many of the emerging leaders in that part of Africa, and I dare say even the rest of Africa, they are ideologically bankrupt or hollow.
Dr. Badiomusi, let me come to you quickly. You serve in government and you're watching what's going on. The official policy at the African Union is that coup leaders are not recognized. That's happening with Niger at the moment, happened with Madagascar because the election was disputed, has happened with Guinea-Bissau, I think. Is it Guinea-Bissau?
Yes, sir, Guinea-Bissau.
Yeah, Guinea-Bissau and some of those other countries. From where you sit, what explains that this continent, on average, 61 years independent this year? Uganda will be celebrating 62 in October. 61 years independent, has failed to manage peaceful transition of power, and the military still continues to play a very active role.
Yes, but by trying to look at the history of the African state, I think we trace back to the times of colonialism. We spent close 70 years under colonial rule, and in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, and then with the first independent country, Ghana, 1957, the colonialists didn't leave willingly because the Africans fought for self-rule
Did they ever leave?
and chased away the colonialists. So that's point number one. That even when they left unwillingly, and they left a neo-colonial hand kept hovering over Africa. And you notice that immediately after countries started getting independence, now there were a number of coups and assassinations. And these were largely orchestrated by these colonial powers. If you see an example of Zaire or DRC, how the Belgians killed Patrice Lumumba just immediately after.
Patrice Lumumba was killed by another colonial power. Right. Another imperial power, not Belgium.
No, the Belgians worked with the Americans because Lumumba had gone to Russia, USSR, because of the Cold War. They came in, but the Belgians were part of that killing. That's why they even burnt his body and took his tooth and kept it in the Belgium until last year when the daughter of Lumumba went to court and regained the tooth and was buried. In Nigeria, they had a coup. In Togo, they killed the president. So the colonialists kept around and caused confusion across many African countries.
The question that begs an answer there,
yes.
Even when you go to DR Congo and Patrice Lumumba,
yes,
the executor of that, the hand that was being used is of Desire Mobutu.
Absolutely, and
yes,
that's where
Mobutu Sese Seko. When does Africa take responsibility when Africans are the ones executing those coups?
Yes, what we saw
and why, maybe?
Immediately post-independence was that these colonialists were definitely using the Africans themselves to fight against each other. So they wouldn't do it directly, but they would use Africans to kill or overthrow fellow Africans. And we saw a wave sweep across Africa in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but then the 90s and thereafter, there was some relative peace across. And the semblance of democracy and the democratic participation of the populations. But it's unfortunate that of late, we now see a resurgence, especially in the Francophone countries which were earlier on colonized by France. Now, there is a remarkable...
Not necessarily France, even Belgium, but they are Francophone.
But Francophone largely. And there is a remarkable difference when you look at the Anglophone countries, the democracy and how they relate with the former colonialists, and the Francophone. France, for a record, it has a firm grip, in a way, over the countries that colonized earlier on. One time we were having a meeting with the president, and the president of Central African Republic sent emissaries to our president. And when we were conversing with them, they were saying 40% of their national army are French. And then they were saying, how can you have a national army and 40% are foreigners? So you find France still influences heavily those countries. And that's why when you trace the coups and the instabilities there, you have the hand
of France.
A quick question, Dr.
France-oriented countries.
That period of lull,
yes,
was it as a result of African maturity, trying to learn to manage its own affairs, or had those colonialists kind of lost interest at that time? What explains that period, almost 2 decades, when the coup activity has kind of gone down?
It was the socialist governments that had taken over.
What had happened?
Well, partly, but also I think after the 70s, 80s, democracy had taken root. There were elections in a number of countries, and I think there was probably relative hope that the leaders who were coming into force were going to cause transformation in most of these countries. So
it's largely as a result, Mitterrand and Chirac, they were socialists, and their approach was significantly different from what the French Republic was. They tended to, they were egalitarian.
François Mitterrand?
Yes, François Mitterrand, yeah.
Yes.
And remember his son, Christophe Mitterrand, was his advisor on African affairs and developed a very close relationship with many of these presidents.
So does that suggest that France, for example, had kind of lost interest and decided, let's let Africans be?
No, they were comfortable with the status quo.
But again, also increasing greed for them to come back and grab our resources, in my view. Because why do they want to keep their eye on Africa? Because Africa is rich in a number of natural resources. And these foreign powers want to have influence.
What does Africa want for itself?
Valid question.
Come again?
What does Africa want for itself?
Africa wants self-rule, and we want to have democracy and translate all these resources into wealth and better quality of life for the Africans. I think that's why the challenge is. Even those who overthrow the others, they do so with the promise that we are going to make life better for the citizens.
So how do they end up getting used by the colonialists?
Well, that's a question which all of us must reflect on. Lack of patriotism, lack of failing to believe in ourselves, and we accept to be used one against the other. You have seen the politicians here running to European parliaments outside and wanting to think that it will be the European Parliament to help them become leaders of their own countries. When the voters
I think it's really ideological backdrops of our people.
It's a weakness.
And president,
yes.
his president,
Yes.
his boss, has been very categorical. I am involved in Khartoum, Sudan, special envoy for Khartoum in the region.
You say our boss, he's your president. Why are you saying? Why are you
Edgar,
divorcing yourself?
would you hold your thought for a moment?
Okay,
Why are you divorcing yourself?
I'm not in cabinet yet.
Let me first bring in,
You are Uganda.
let
You
me
are
first bring in Honorable Winnie Kiza. It's a kind of conundrum that after a struggle, after relinquishing independence to colonizers, fighting to regain that independence, attaining it, and now holding it for at least 60 years across the continent, we still can't explain that the overarching arm of the colonialist in this and making them responsible while not taking responsibility ourselves.
Well, I would say it's quite unfortunate that after those 60 years, we can't grow and be managers of our own affairs. It's also unfortunate that when we were still under colonization, our colonizers taught us to solely depend on them for almost everything, to the extent that when we even took charge of our own affairs, we still thought that they have to give us a shoulder to lean on. But the other thing is, I think, on our part as a people, the African leaders, majority of them who come to power, even when they come with promises of transforming their communities, they have solely looked at themselves first and the ones around them, to the extent that even when they tend to be pretending to be doing the right things they pretend to be doing are not for the benefit of the majority of the population that they take care of. And as a result, you find that there is still disgruntlement amongst the population, and every person who is closer to them thinks that if I also got there, then I will be in a position to also enrich those who are within my catchment area and be able to transform ourselves first, then possibly the population next. That is why even at the beginning when you were introducing the topic, you said that where these coups are taking place, the population seems to be poor. There is a sense of hopelessness amongst the population. Why should they be poor? Many of these countries have minerals. Like Chris is saying, in most of the African countries, we have a lot of deposits that we think those colonizers still want to come and take part of.
Uranium seems to be at the center of the
Uranium seems to be at the center. There is petroleum in the majority of these countries. Diamonds. If you go to Congo here, you will find all tribes of minerals are in Congo.
And all tribes of peoples from all over the world.
Yes, all tribes of people from all over the world are in Congo, including vultures. So for our leaders to remain steadfast and firm and say we shall deal with the interests of our people first has become the issue. to the extent that whoever is in power is looking at self and family and close relatives and friends. And so there is discontent amongst the population. Population, the citizenry is dissatisfied with what their leaders are doing. And as a result, those who are closer to power, those who can access weapons that can enable them get these leaders out of power will use them to their own advantage. So that could be partly why there are a lot of coups that are happening, that we Africans, even with the experience that we should have acquired in leadership, we don't use it to the betterment of our population. We use it possibly to our own advantage, and as a result, the population remains unsatisfied, and whoever is closer to power will think, possibly if I went there, those that are closer to me will also be closer to the national cake. So you will find it is just a rotation of power from those who have the means to those who are closer to power. You will find that someone who was a vice president is the one that is coming in with a coup to remove the president, or someone commanding the army. Like the case of, is it Gambia? Where the one who was in charge of the command of the forces of the president is the one who led the coup.
On the contrary, in West Africa, it's junior officers.
The junior officers.
Captains and lieutenants.
And colonels.
Some
of them, but they are closer to power. At that point, they must be having at least a presence in the army, and the army believes in them. And of course, there is a promise that when I get into power, when you help me get there, we shall also create our own cocoon.
Okay.
So, and I would believe that it's because of that lack of the patriotism that Chris has been talking about, that when you get into power, you are into it for your own self and those around you. So people keep saying now, I think I also take it.
Someone is concerned for Dr. Chris Baryomun's speaking on diplomatically sensitive matters and asking and questioning whether these are your personal opinions or official government policy.
I told you he's actually doing well.
I speak for government.
So even when Chris, even when Chris is speaking for government, we should also be learning lessons from these countries. Some of them are challenging the overstay of presidents in office. Yes, some of them are as a result of mismanagement of the resources, and those who are now leading and championing the coups think they will manage the resources well. But I know that it's not for the good of the population, but possibly for their own interests.
Yes, Joan Kashaya admires you so much, and she's watching, so she sends you love. A lady called Joan Kashaya. Someone is saying, yes, someone is cautioning Edgar and says, Edgar, the show can't have two hosts. Please tell my friend Edgar to be a panelist. We need to pick uninterrupted views from those honorable guests.
Much obliged. You know, Honorable Dr. Barrios is very engaging. You can't avoid but it's contagious.
Hold your thought a moment. Let me come to Hon.Ssemujju Ibrahim Nganda. Can Africa afford, I mean, from your own perspective, you've practiced as a journalist and now as a member of parliament, and you've been traveling across the continent and the world. What explains this military involvement in governance in Africa, almost across the board? Different dynamics in Francophone, Lusophone, and which is this one, the British
Anglophone.
Anglophone, yes.
They have the Maghreb also, which is
the Maghreb. Yes. What in your view explains that involvement? And do you see an end in sight?
Major General James Kazin was charged, and he was actually supposed to have been sentenced to death. One of the crimes he had committed was creation of a brigade in West Nile. But also, he had influenced President Museveni in deploying and in promotion of many officers here. We fought Rwanda largely because of him and Salim Saleh. So when he became,
That's Kisangani 1 and 2 around 2003?
Yes.
Yes.
The creation of that brigade in Western Nile and the other appointments and deployment he had influenced is what led the Ssemujju and their team to advise Museveni that he was about to take over power. But one time when President Museveni was leaving Entebbe airport, he told the soldiers who had gone to see him off, I have said that many times, including Kazin, Kashaka, and now late Taban Chavende, that if they want to keep the revolution, they need to do 3 things. One of them, he said, you go to and recruit children who have finished senior 6 in our area so that they dominate command. And that conversation was followed by appointment of Kashaka as chief of personnel and administration. So the appetite by military people to take over power is always there. It can fail, but it's not only in Sudan, even here. Kazin nearly succeeded. When he staffed Behanga military training, if you read that report of the Mbabas and Saleh and Ssemujju, Behanga at the maximum was not supposed to have more than 3,000 trainees. But Kazin had put there 7,000.
7,000.
And at that time, the justification was the war in Rwenzori.
The ADF.
The ADF. Under Hon.Ssemujju. But actually, the man was preparing to take over government. So even here, they may have suppressed them. These orders, class 1 of Rweru, don't think they are orders against a foreign enemy. So the appetite by the military and the way you involve them in the politics, here maybe the advantage is that you have, of course, Reverend General Tumukunde said Museveni is not a military man, but at least he has the knowledge of the military. So there are different reasons why all these coups have happened. I don't think Kazin would have removed the government because he wanted to run it better. I don't think so. But he simply saw an opportunity also to take over. And
it failed.
And it failed, and he got arrested, charged. He was supposed to have been sentenced. That's why Stephen Kavuma had to issue an order against the court martial, which was supposed the following day to be issuing a judgment.
What time did the order come out?
After 7. Because
and then shortly sometime after that,
the man
was,
dies. Because Kazin didn't know. We did the story. I was still at the Observer. The crimes he was being accused didn't know that they carried the sentence. So because the judgment was coming up, so we just did a review to say that if this man loses these cases.
What are the possible sentences
so
available?
That's when he woke up that Amokchare can be sentenced to death. So he went running to Kavuma, who had been a state minister for defense, to save him. So the latest...
Kavuma was judge at the same, at that time.
So the latest coups...
an interim order staying.
So the latest coups where they have happened in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, the explanation is the insurgency. That this government has failed to contain insurgency. Of course, the bit of corruption in all these. They blame Al-Qaeda, they blame Islamists. What I am trying to understand is how can a military blame the president for failing to fight an insurgency? Because it is your responsibility. It is your responsibility as military to fight the insurgents.
He's the commander-in-chief. He gives
the orders. I said I want to understand.
Is it a rhetoric question?
I want to understand. Because the accusation in Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali is that the sitting presidents had failed to execute war against insurgents and therefore they need to be repressed. And of course, in Niger specific, and I think a little bit of Burkina Faso, they also blamed for corruption. So the earlier coups in most of the...
Oh, just a minute, for the benefit of our viewers, these 4 countries you've just mentioned, the leaders who were deposed, were they civilian leaders or?
There were civilian leaders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without a military background.
Yeah, so...
So would you understand then why the military would find them, would accuse them?
I have not seen any evidence of any of those presidents stopping the military from fighting the insurgents. That's why I said I need to understand. How can the military, whose duty is to fight insurgency, fail, and then they are blaming a sitting president for the failure? In the case of Niger, of course, they say the president was a stooge of the French. They also wanted the French military camps there closed, and then they go away. They are stealing our minerals. We'll do it ourselves. So the presence of the French in Niger also became part of the problem. But the military cannot convince me that the reason they are unable to defeat the insurgency was because of the president. So we have had the reasons for the coups. The earlier ones, most of them, were just gunmen and military men taking advantage, seeing an opportunity that the one who is in power is vulnerable, I can take over. And that explains why Museveni, who had terribly lost an election, and even if we had carried out an election, the most democratic, both in heaven and on earth, Museveni had 0 chance of winning with his party. But because of the military background, he had also recruited people, including his own brother. I don't think he did so because he wanted to reinforce security in Uganda. But at that time, it was just a matter of taking advantage, the coups that you had in Nigeria. So most of the coup leaders at that time were simply was staging a military coup was one way of accessing power. And that's why I think Obote, when they were in Tanzania, was asking how many generals do you have? So that time, it meant that if you don't have generals, please don't speak about issues of...
The question you need to interrogate after we come out of a short break is the question of the reference back to the colonial powers.
It's
an easy escape
I am
route.
actually hesitant.
It's an easy escape
when
route.
Nana Akufo became president in Ghana, I think 2017, in his inaugural speech, he said we need to stop blaming colonialists. He said for 60 and so many years, we've been in charge of our affairs. We can't continue blaming history. Museveni here...
Can we?
We can't.
No, can we stop?
No, the leaders will not stop. Because as he said, it's an
escape route.
You shield your own incompetence by blaming others. I don't think Museveni has any reason to blame, because if you look at most of his speeches, he says at the time of independence, we are near at the same level in terms of GDP with South Korea. That Qatar, where he went with his family to beg.
To beg?
Yes. 23 years of the king there was just enough for him to turn around the country and then hand over to his son. So in 40 years...
But Qatar had discovered petroleum, so that it had petrodollars flowing.
Dubai has petroleum in Dubai contributes just 3%. In fact...
Because Dubai has been winning itself off reliance on petrodollars.
They tell you that they like comparing themselves with Nigeria. That Nigeria has resources, we have visionary leaders. That's the difference between us and Nigeria. So even this whole idea of resources, they are stealing them. Dubai has no resources, but they are very happy they have leaders. So you can no longer blame history. So these coups in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and wherever they have happened, all these coups have nothing to do with colonialism. Just Africans mismanaging themselves. And that's the point Nana Akufo was talking about in Ghana. You can no longer blame history.
Honorable Ssemujju, I actually have very strong views on that.
Welcome.
We Africans, and I'll say it before we go into the break, we are the authors of our own misery.
Yeah.
We should learn to take responsibility for our mistakes.
Let's pick that conversation right from there after a very short commercial break. We'll be right back.
NBS Frontline.
Hello, darling.
Hi, Granny.
What did you do this weekend?
Well, on Friday, I went on a science trip with my classmates to Windy to see the gorillas.
Then we watched the cup final in London.
Oh.
On Saturday, my friends and I met up to hunt some dragons again. Also, I taught the vacuum cleaner and the TV this new dance everyone's doing. They're really getting into it. And on Sunday, I went to bed watching the world from space. And you? Yeah, seriously, Granny.
With Airtel 5G's lightning-fast speeds and seamless connectivity, you won't believe what's next.
Airtel, a reason to imagine.
The Heroes in Health Awards, HIHA, is back! Welcome to the 4th edition of the Heroes in Health Awards. The Heroes in Health Awards once again presents you an opportunity to celebrate your heroes in the health sector across Uganda under the theme, Strategic Multi-Sectoral Partnerships to Transform the Health System and Workforce. Do you know an organization, innovation, or individual whom you admire for their professionalism, sacrifice, and impact in your community? Do they go above and beyond the ordinary call of their duty? Let us know about your hero. To nominate, visit www.hihawards.com. Nominations are now open until the 1st of October 2023. The Heroes in Health Awards 2023 is sponsored by the Ministry of Health in conjunction with Extraordinary Media with support from
Why does Johnny Walker blend whiskey? Imagine these are single malts. This one's smoky, rich and fruity, and this one's creamy. Now, individually, they're great, but blended together in Johnny Walker Black Label, you get taste that hits all the right notes.
You will always know when you're in the presence of the finest. It's like time slows down, just enough for you to feel everything in full flavor.
Just Malt Lager. Alcohol is not for certain persons under 18. Please drink responsibly.
Attention, attention! Many of you have been buying backroom sheets. That has to stop. Engineer Kajubi say class in session. No school fees. Kati waliwo abagamba nti all mabati are the same. Mbalaba. It seems you want a retake in building your home. Some of you go to make road call on your roof, only to find that karate yasomye. Eyo muveyo. And those of you taking shortcuts, eyo nyondo kumutwe wekaba. Now, let me tell you, superior quality, terimba. Nera, ask for Uganda badge because nothing beats superior quality.
Choose from Uganda Butty's wide range of superior quality roof sheets and make your home the pride of the neighborhood.
Now, this is what I call a home.
Uganda Bati, nothing beats superior quality. Are you aware of the investment opportunities waiting for the local investors? Do you have a clear understanding of the comprehensive taxation regime for finance?